Anita Thompson, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate it very much. So today, we wanted to talk a little bit about your time in Poland during the start of the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Right.
Of 2022.
A war, invasion, yes.
Invasion. It is.
Yes.
It's being referred to as an war, but it is absolutely an unprovoked invasion. So why don't we just start out? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection with that area and your family over there and that kind of thing.
Well, I was born in Colorado, in Fort Collins, Colorado. My parents were, they immigrated my father from Ukraine and my mother from Poland to get their degrees at CSU in Fort Collins. And my mom remained there and raised us. And my father ended up back in Kiev, where he did pass away in 2015.
Okay.
But we were raised in Fort Collins, Colorado, very American kind of family with, immigrant parents.
But you are a first generation.
I'm first generation,
American.
very American, but I have the love of Ukraine and Poland in me. And
what did your parents do?
Well, my father was, he was in Fort Collins. They were both in real estate. And, although they have math and chemistry advanced degrees, but they were in real estate.
Okay.
And my mother was a developer. She's mostly retired now, and my father was a sort of a landlord, and he was also more of an athlete. He played a lot more than my mom did. So
great.
They were divorced like the day that I was born or something. They waited to be divorced. So I had a very peaceful childhood in that respect. I never had to deal with a divorce.
Okay.
So I just so those two being apart was, part of my lifestyle, like a lot of American families.
Right.
Yes, they sort of split up.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had a daughter, my little sister. She's 17, and I'm almost 50, so she, could be the age of my, like a daughter if I had one.
Right.
And so I sort of have those feelings of protection and wanting to protect her. And when Joe Biden, on January 30th, he's made the announcement that he believed Putin would invade. So, of course, my roots will always be here, but I intended to, if Veronica and her mom, Olga, would not come, which they didn't, they were worried about me being brainwashed, and maybe I was watching too much news.
Right.
And so I just kept, every single day I just kept beating the drum for them to please come and accept my plane ticket. And that didn't happen, so I went there.
And they live in Poland?
No, actually in Kiev.
In Kiev?
In Kiev, okay. Yeah, that's where my father passed away and
I see.
Where my little sister was born. But although she is he made sure that she was an American citizen with an American passport.
Okay.
So
she could come to the United States anytime she wanted to.
But there's a really good reason that she doesn't, yeah.
Right.
For now.
So when this was all happening, this was all going down, she left Ukraine.
She did, well, finally, not right away.
Okay.
They first resisted, and they just didn't think that Putin would invade, like most people didn't. Zelensky didn't even think that Putin would invade. But Biden's intelligence was stellar.
Spot on.
Yeah, spot on. So thank God he was in the office when this happened, in a way. So I just kept on. I just had a terrible feeling in my gut, actually. I do have a New York Times feed. I stopped watching the news because it was kind of stressful and a little agonizing, being so helpless here while my little sister and her mom are in Kiev. But I have a New York Times feed that was just, it's kind of a constant flow of news. It's not too sensational, like in the... So I kept up with that, and but I still, even with the information, I had a gut feeling, because my father's mantra was, my father was very involved in local politics in Kiev, and from early days of the democracy, just starting in Ukraine.
Right, which was 1991, I believe.
I think it was around 1991. Yes. But then, like if you remember the friendly Orange Revolution in Maidan Square, when there was a problem with the election, and that's when Ukrainians sort of realized that demonstrating and democracy actually works. It doesn't have to be violent.
Right.
So they experienced that. They overthrew an election and started over, and it was pretty remarkable, without a drop of blood. And then in 2000, I guess it was 14, was
Yes.
when Putin started invading Crimea. And so anyway, my father's mantra was always that Putin would take Kiev in 1 week, and that just kept ringing in my ears. So I just made arrangements to be in Krakow, and I let the girls know that, okay, I'm coming to the border.
Right.
So it made more of an impact, and they got on the train.
Okay. So they were able to get on the train and get to Poland
Yes.
before the invasion.
No.
No.
They came during. No, it was about 2 weeks into the invasion.
Okay.
My little sister, she, Nika, we call her, Veronica, she and her best friend Ira left Kiev through, it was insane. I'm so grateful they're alive. They were...
So this was early March then, because the invasion was February 24th, I
February
believe.
24th, I guess so.
So,
It was at that, yeah.
And at what time did you actually fly over there?
That's a good question. I flew over there, it would have been,
First week of March, probably?
3 weeks ago, whatever 3 weeks ago
okay,
is.
first week of March.
Yes.
Or that would be, this is April 6th, so you'd have been the beginning of the second week of March, probably.
I guess so, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I got home a little over I got there a little over 3 weeks ago. I figured that out at home, but I'm not quite sure of the dates.
Okay.
We could look that up. But
And they're still in Krakow.
So my agreement with them over text messaging, thank God for Instagram and social media in this circumstance,
Yes.
because it was the way I could communicate with a 17-year-old.
Yes.
And the deal was, because they didn't want to leave their family, Nika's boyfriend is, they've been together for several years, and he's now required to fight. She didn't want to leave Europe. And I said, that's fine. I said, just get yourself to Poland. I'll meet you at the border, and I'll take care of you. I'll get you in a family apartment. We'll take care of you. Just please get out of there. And so she finally agreed. It had to be her idea. She's very independent. So I just met them. I met them basically in Krakow. They took a train and then a bus.
Okay.
So the train is where you hear the stories of people being, where it was pretty sketchy, and there were some, because you don't have to buy tickets right now to flee.
Right.
With the bus, she was fortunate to have some funds to be able to buy a ticket.
Okay.
So it was a long journey. They spent about 16 hours at the border. A total of 3 days to get from Kiev, from the village south of Kiev, where she escaped to for about a week, and then made her way to near Kiev to get on the train.
Okay.
So they're in an ancient village of a town. It's a large city actually called Cherkasy, and they're in a village on the outskirts of Cherkasy, so they moved closer to Kiev to get on a train and then to a bus.
Okay.
3 days of travel, these girls. So it was, in the end, it was my little sister and her best friend, Ira, 17 and 18-year-old girls.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did they have to report in terms of how things are in Ukraine?
Anger. Well, first was shock over text messages, and at this point, it's anger.
Right.
But the way the way she and her friend, the way they express it is really remarkable and beautiful, and gives me hope, because they express it more with humor, or they sort of vent it with humor,
right.
And putting Hitler mustache on Putin, and things, and just a kind of healthy teenage expression of something really horrible and life altering. I mean, I can see the change in my sister. Like we were at the mall. Let's say we were at the mall getting supplies in Krakow, and there were about 75 to 100 American soldiers there already in camo, full camo.
Right.
And I talked to a few of them, and to see my sister's face, she's traumatized to see soldiers already.
Right.
But she could compose herself after some time. The soldiers were beautiful. I have mixed feelings to see our boys there, but it's comforting too. It's very comforting to see our boys.
Yeah,
So her reaction there, it's.
Do you have any information from them on the condition of their home?
Okay,
in
so
Kiev?
yes, Olga's is her mother,
Okay.
my stepmother. She's
Sure.
2 years younger than I am. She's wonderful. She's a concert pianist and a professor at the university. So she is, she's a city, she's a city
Sure.
person, and she didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay where she is, and she will go there. All throughout Kiev, there's an extensive system of rail, like subways, and they're very deep in the ground. So those serve as the bomb shelters.
Okay.
And she doesn't always go down to the bomb shelter. She feels comfortable enough in her part of the city where she is because she's so deep in the city. She's not on the outskirts or the borders. So she feels comfortable not always going to the shelter. She has pets at home. But although she doesn't leave home, it's either to the bomb shelter or staying at home. Kind of like COVID lockdown, but more life-threatening. But she has a great attitude also. She is actually originally Russian. So she has a lot of, you could imagine the mixed feelings she has and the pain she sees of someone like Putin taking over as he is. But their home is still standing, and their mother
Is still there.
is still alive and communicating every day through Facebook and telephone.
Okay.
That's huge. So every single day she wakes up, because the nighttime in Kiev is when it's the most difficult. I don't have family anywhere along like Mariupol and the south. And
The places that have really been hit hard by
and
the
taken
bombing
over.
and
That are just destroyed and where there are already mass graves. I am so great. It's awful that it's happening, but I'm grateful that the girls are out.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
That's your first instinct is to take care of your own family and.
Right.
And then now my time, now that generally my family is safe and Olga feels safe, I can now help. I can volunteer for groups and.
So Olga is in Krakow.
So my sister Nika and her best friend, they are both in Krakow.
I'm sorry. What was her name again?
Well, it's Veronica, but we call her Nika.
Nika. I'm sorry.
It took me a while to catch up too on her new nickname, which is absolutely her name, Nika.
Okay.
She's amazing. She's works in the it's like what we would call it a circus. In Kiev, it's a theater academy. She's extremely sharp, top of her class, and she is gifted with language, English, Russian, Ukrainian, and she chose pantomime, which is kind of the ultimate language.
Yes.
So anyway, she's come to see like this full person. I haven't seen her since 2014, and my father passed away in 2015, so it was 2014. I haven't seen her.
8 years since
8 years.
you've seen her.
That's right. Yeah. So I haven't. Yeah. So although we've been in touch with through social media and texting, but not really in person. So it was really beautiful to see her blossom like this, even under these circumstances.
Were they able to bring most of their belongings? Or
no, not at all. Not at all.
Just, whatever they had on them was what they brought, and that's all they had.
And her documents, her passport.
Sure.
She kept those close. Like they're very smart that way.
Yeah.
She knows what it means on the other side, that to be an American citizen is such a privilege, And a visa, we're in the process of getting a visa for ERO right now, and I realized just what an extensive process it is. I mean, a visa is not an invitation to the United States. It's giving you permission to come to the border to ask for permission.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's coming home. I'm just so very grateful for our way of life and our values.
Yes. Are you thinking about going back?
Oh yes, I'll definitely go back. So now, with our apartment, we have now an established family apartment that I found right 3 doors down from the embassy, or sorry, from the consulate. It's actually Consulate Row. I call it Embassy Row. Okay. But. So I'll go back and I'll do what I can. There's several groups where I love. Sean Penn's group, the core, they're setting down roots, and I love Sean and I love what he's doing. And there's also a really important, small but powerful little group for animals, for farm animals and pet and companion animals. The Harmony Fund out of Massachusetts. They fund all these smaller boots on the ground type volunteer organizations that help animals. And
Okay.
they're moving tons of food, and the volunteers can't quite go back into Ukraine, but I spent time with them and interviewed them for the Huffington Post in 2014. And I was really impressed with their work, and they're going strong now. So that's one thing that's kind of left behind a little, or that animals are not the focus on the New York Times, of course, but
Right.
but they're important to, to my
Right. And I mean,
values.
really, it's kind of a holding pattern at this point, right? Because nobody knows what's
Nobody
going to
knows.
happen next and where this is going to lead. And I'm interested, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we came on, that neither you or I are experts in this field, but
Yes.
we have our observations.
Right.
And I'm very interested in your observation, having been over there in Poland, being close, being around people who were in Ukraine. You're an observant person. You synthesize information. You think about what's happening. What are your thoughts about the future as a result of this?
I see when we brought goods, suitcases full of goods for the refugee
Right.
camps, and I thought almost like it would be some kind of people, almost not like a celebration, but that people would be so happy to be alive and out of Ukraine. But what it is such a deep shock
Right.
and sadness in these camps where families were just 2 weeks ago were at this kitchen table having their borscht, and now they're on cots, hundreds of people at a time, and it is shock that I think probably would last a generation again. I recognize it from my grandparents and my mother, who remembers Stalin and the KGB beating down the door for my grandfather was a soldier. He was an officer in the underground army in Poland, the Army of Craiovia, the People's Army, and then it lasts for. I see it in my parents, I saw it in my grandparents, and I see it yet again in even the children's faces. It's not going to go away. If the war ends tomorrow, we have a generation of people who are traumatized. 44 million in Ukraine, several million in Poland alone, and then Romania and Slovakia, and all these countries that are absorbing people who one day had to flee for their lives, which the girls, the way they explain it, they're more fortunate because they could, for example, get on a bus and they knew they had a place to go and they knew I was waiting for them.
Right.
But there are families that didn't have that guarantee and still don't have that guarantee. The
Right.
goodwill that's flowing from the Polish people is impressive to me on a level I've never seen, because Poland and Ukraine were not always the buddies. In fact, growing up, there was so much tension. It was kind of ridiculous, and now all those tensions are gone, and they're working together because they have a common enemy,
Yep.
Putin. But yes, my observation is that this is a bigger tragedy than we realize looking at the news or looking at the newspaper. This is going to last a generation, and the ripple effects, I mean, it's come to Owl Farm in Woody Creek. I'm shaken by it, but at the same time, the generosity of the Polish people or all of Europe. I mean, Europe is unified for the first time in my lifetime. And I went to living in boarding school in Switzerland for 2 years. We learned a lot about the way Europe works together and doesn't work together.
Right.
There have been some splits, and not just in countries themselves, but culturally, the right versus the left. With the Trump era and the right wing kind of wave that went across Europe.
Right.
It's swinging back dramatically right now, which I guess that is if there is something good to come out of this might be it.
I think that Americans. I mean, I thought I knew about European history, and when it looked like there was going to be a war, I got a couple of books. I got a book 1919, which is about post World War I, and it's a very, very long historical work on essentially the effort led by Woodrow Wilson at the time and his 14 points to try and create a world where war would become an anachronism, where war would no longer
It would be
occur.
necessary.
And the historical assessment of that is really interesting because it was the only thing you can really give those folks credit for is trying.
Yeah.
Because they tried, but a lot of the things they tried actually contributed to violence in the future in the end. And it turned into...
Like the contribute to violence of Germany becoming so destitute.
Germany and just in general, it became like the biggest real estate deal in history because basically it was the developed nations of the West carving up the world based on these criteria that they thought were best for people they'd never even met, and not just in Europe, but all over the world. And that kind of set the stage for the remainder of the 20th century. And it seemed like, and I'm just processing kind of my thoughts on it right now. But it seemed like we were just getting to the point where we might be reaching a realm where in fact that vision might be a possibility, and then here you go, right? And here comes and all the misinformation and all the lies about the reasons for the invasion.
About historically,
all the historic lies.
That the Ukrainians are. Yeah, it's really important to understand. Ukrainians were never Russian. They're not Russian. They're Ukrainian. And there was, I don't know what, maybe. Well, you would know maybe more about budgets. But also, there was at a budget hearing on, because we've got to have this historic low of budget. Our military budgets in Europe is down to like 3 or 6% or something. Yeah, and they've already doubled it. Yeah. And then in that meeting, one of the representatives from Kenya said one of the most interesting things I've heard to the Russian delegation. He said, "Look, we learned this in Africa as we were shedding the." British Empire and the French empires, you don't mess with the borders anymore. If we would have border disputes, we would be, and there are, of course, wars constantly, battles in Africa. He said, we learned that lesson, and some of us can live in peace once we realize the borders are where they are and leave them. Right. So Putin is now obsessed with this border. We think that could be his reason, because he thinks the Russian people, he had this fantasy, the Russian people just really kind of missed being under Russian rule, and they were going to, and the Russian, Zelensky would flee, and the Ukrainian citizens or soldiers would lay down their arms and be glad to be home. That's shattered. It is absolutely the opposite of what actually happened. Right, right. What are your thoughts on how... Just from and I really appreciate the way you think about things, because you think about things from the individual level up, right? I mean, and so much of what you hear on the news is the strategic kind of all like the big chess pieces moving around, all the retired generals on all the news networks talking about moving the chess pieces around and who's going to move where. And it's important information. I don't want to. I guess you can't help it if you are a strategic thinker to try to figure it out what his next move will be. But and so typically the way that you articulate this issue is the kind of thinking that comes after. Really? Okay. That's my observation. Maybe we're trying to think what we could possibly benefit from all this pain. Well, and I think it's good because you kind of accelerate the conversation about the impact on the individual into the moment when the event is actually it's occurring. Real. Okay, that's true. It's not over. Yeah, I'm already thinking about what it's going to be like from the future of my sister, 17-year-old. Right. I can't stop thinking about that and the millions of teenagers and young people. What this will do, I don't know, but But there is one. But I know one thing that I've already seen that I know to be true is that already some of the rifts that we had and the division here and in Europe of the right versus the left, people are coming together. I saw it in Poland in the refugee camps in Krakow. They're more isolated. They're more like welcomed in the churches and the auditoriums, and they're very organized. The Poles are so incredibly organized right now. It's really beautiful. And Poland was also divided, and of course there are realistic divisions between the right and the left, because Poland was a pariah kind of lately, if you may know, in the European Union. But their economy is so good, so the European Union kind of left them alone, to the chagrin of Polish immigrants like my mom or myself. Interesting. But now we've kind of put that aside to deal with something very tragic and a humanitarian crisis now. But I just feel like there really is a unity right now in Poland that I hope lasts. and here too. I just when people saw what was happening in Ukraine, a lot of even my family, we have a lot of Trumpers in my family, and not I wouldn't say a lot, but they're we all came together
some more
over
conservative
this.
people,
more conservative, more conservative,
as opposed to the more liberal or progressive side.
I come from, I didn't grow up. I just grew up being Republican, like a moderate Republican.
Right.
I think because during the Reagan era, that was when Lech Wałęsa was helping to take down communism. As I see Zelensky and Wałęsa as a warrior and one as this amazing leader of people, both. I see them kind of in parallel from my perspective as an immigrant.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it was kind of Reagan's time also that
it was, and history has been pretty kind to Ronald Reagan over the years. I mean, he was a fairly controversial, criticized president at the time.
Really? Okay, I was so young. I bet.
And he was the first presidential election I voted in was 1980.
Okay.
And Ronald Reagan was the first president that I voted for. It was after Jimmy Carter's first.
Sure.
First Jimmy Carter's term.
Only term. Yes.
Yeah. Unemployment was really high. Inflation was really high.
The gas lines and the malaise. Yes.
Yeah, and so that was a really interesting, challenging time for the world and for the United States. But
prosperity.
It is interesting that the connection that you make in your mind between Lech Wałęsa, who was the solidarity leader, for the workers of Poland.
Yeah, it was constant in my household.
Yeah,
we were so proud.
And Zelensky is. And I don't know very much about Zelensky. I know he was an entertainer, and I know that he ran for president, got elected. I know that, I don't think it's certainly not a surprise that Ukraine, coming out of its cultural relationship with the East, with Russia in particular, over the generations, that there was corruption in their political system, and he became president during a corrupt time.
Sure,
and he had a very low approval rating until this happened. And there is that famous, and I don't know if it's true or not, but there's that famous now meme that's going around. I need ammunition, not a ride.
Right.
Have you seen that one?
Right.
Where
he was not going to flee.
In theory, supposedly, the United States State Department reached out to him and said, "We're sending you a helicopter
with a cash.
We're going to get you out. We're going to get you out of there." And he goes, "A ride? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition."
Yes.
And so he stayed, and now, of course, his approval rating is through the roof because he stayed. And
with his family.
With his family, his wife won't leave.
Yeah.
So.
And that was the attitude of millions of people. And I don't. All of my family members or any of the Ukrainians that I know, it is an absolute. That is a common theme with everybody of fighting. And women and children should go because they can't fight, and that's. The unit is the incredible solidarity again, but this time in a hot war, not in a cold war, and it's.
Well, there was I recently saw a documentary about the Revolution of Dignity from 2013, 2014.
What is the revolution? What is that?
The 90-day period where they call it in Ukraine the Revolution of Dignity.
Dignity. Okay, the friendly orange revolution.
The friendly orange revolution, which you call the orange, which is
okay.
And where
I guess that's
it was a peaceful protest, but it was not peaceful.
Right. Well, we lost about 100.
They lost a couple hundred people. They had at the time they had Ukrainian kind of stormtroopers who were going around and
they blew up several buildings. It was awful.
So it was and the existing government at the time, they ultimately were able to get the existing government, the existing president to leave and move on. But that to me really was a demonstration of the Ukrainian people have made a decision. They want to democratize. They want to be a Western nation.
Sure, they want to be free.
Right.
Sure, they don't want to be under a dictator.
Right.
And there is something extraordinary about Maidan Square that I've seen now, and I've never visited Maidan Square. This is where the three revolutions took place. It was 2002, 2014, and somewhere in between. I think maybe that's what you mentioned.
Right.
These things all took place, and every time there are a couple 100,000 people who are constantly in Maidan Square in the center of Kiev.
Right.
And they're they're peaceful. I guess we have these experiences too, but maybe not months and months at a time, because we are more spread out in the United States.
Yes.
And we are, our revolution took place a couple hundred years ago.
Right.
So we might just be a little more ahead of Ukraine if they can get through this war and maintain their independence. We'll see. But it is extraordinary to see the actual physical location of hundreds of thousands of people going through for the same cause together. Right. And I mean, my father was there making sandwiches. He was older, so he didn't want to take up space, with a gun for his own ego. But he was there every day, supporting however he could. And to know, and I have that in my heart that I know that they will always have this sense of dignity and will fight to the last breath, which also worries me too, that they're not going to surrender.
I don't think they are.
This is why my sister and I we did attend the rallies and the peace rallies every night in Krakow. Every night that we attended together, it was for peace, and we did say NATO close the sky, which I know is asking for a bigger war, but I don't see how it's possible. I don't know if you see a way out. How could we get out? There needs to be
some diplomatic bridge that comes from somewhere that allows for a reduction of tensions, and but it's a hard one because you have an individual who has spent 2 decades creating an environment and a structure that permitted this action.
Right, that's
and
true. You mean like his staff at the Kremlin? He's insulated.
Yeah, exactly. He's created this structure which is so insulated, and it's such a harken back to that old Soviet.
Sure.
Paranoid, super controlled Pravda,
and the whole
information control.
Obsession with history. I mean, there is a place. It's really important to know history. But when he met with Macron, apparently the French is a prime minister, I guess, he said that it was like 5 hours of a history lesson. He couldn't really talk current policy because Putin was spinning around in history and how Ukraine really used to be part of Russia, and he was not all there, not present. He's not in the present moment. Right. He is living in some kind of past. It's also an altered. So we're dealing with someone that just it seems medieval to me that one man can
very medieval
can do this to an entire world.
Very feudal,
in 2022.
Old European feudal. It's like all that stuff is rising up after the centuries, right? And it's starting with him, and hopefully it ends with him.
Right, there you go. That's what I hope too.
Because it's really,
of course, that's what I hope. Who doesn't
really
hope
terrifying. That? It's really terrifying. But I mean, all you have to do is and again, these are things that I have learned recently. The Holodomor,
I don't know what that is.
It was in the early 1930s, essentially the starvation of the Ukrainian people by Stalin.
Oh, yeah, okay, I know. Yes, you're talking about a very systematic starvation.
When he nationalized all the farms.
Yes,
in
and took
Ukraine,
their wheat.
took their land.
Yeah.
And when they didn't meet their quotas, they didn't meet their food quotas, he didn't leave them enough food to survive the winter.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, you didn't make enough food, so I'm just going to take all of it, and you're just going to have to fend for yourselves." Yeah. And people starved in their homes.
Yeah, no, this I do know. I forgot. Yeah, it's
so why would Putin rationally have a thought that Ukrainians would have any emotional sentiment of wanting to be part of? That old Soviet system. Now, I think it is true that there are connections between the Russian and the Ukrainian people over the years.
Sure, and parts of Ukraine, there are Russian separatists in the east and around the Crimean Peninsula. Sure, there are, and those that they've been fighting for a long time. I don't know if that represents a historic, Ukraine as a whole. I would say it doesn't, but Putin does seem to think
he's certainly leveraging that, and it's got to be. I mean, he's an economic guy. I mean, Elon Musk is the guy who says, "I'm not the world's richest man. Putin is." And he's used his position ever since Boris Yeltsin ushered him into office to enrich himself more than anything else.
Sure.
That's what he's done more than anything.
And so that's not enough now. So now he's moving on to taking over 44 million people, I guess.
It's like he's doing his Alexander the Great imitation. He's
So he's
decided he needs to be this great historic, long-time military conqueror or something.
I remember years ago a documentary about Putin, on a documentary that he made about himself and a lesson that he learned when he was a child in an apartment in Russia, maybe in Moscow, that he cornered a rat. Like he physically cornered a rat and learned what that meant, that the rat was going to take you out with them. And I always there is this problem. Like we don't want to corner Putin. If I were NATO, it's tough. So when he's
a very dangerous creature.
So
when he's cornered.
So when we chant to, because it is, when I was with my sister, I wanted to show a good example. I was like, I believe it is a correct chant. It is a good sentiment. It's an honorable sentiment for us to ask NATO to, get involved with at least to stop the bombs from dropping from the sky. And I know that could mean entering the war. But I asked myself, I was like, is this really the smart thing or the humanitarian thing? I said, yes, I think so. Because I really do believe that that if we let him if we continue to let him do his damage, it's already going to be a generation to recover that would only be worse. Yeah.
At least a generation. And I know that in Europe, I have a friend, a college friend who lives in Switzerland, and she and I chat on the phone every couple of months. And last time we talked, she told me that is it iodine pills that you take to avoid radiation poisoning?
Something. Oh yeah, potassium iodide.
Potassium iodide. She told me that the whole country was sold out. Everybody had bought up because they're afraid.
Sure.
If there's
the nuclear
tactical nuclear war and fallout.
Sure.
They're afraid of that.
Right. The switch changed. Before we had like this thought that because nuclear weapons would prevent a large-scale World War III, right?
Right.
But that might be. Are you following this? I don't. I mean, I've seen some in the New York Times. These more precise supersonic missiles that are.
Yeah, the hypersonic.
The hypersonic missile. That is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
The hypersonic weapons are absolutely terrifying.
So
because we don't have defense systems that can stop them.
Right. So here we are.
Yep. So here we are. Okay. So it's starting to remind me. Again, I was like a year old at the time, but it's reminding me politically of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Where you have to have leaders figure out a way to find a diplomatic bridge to move away from what appears to be a situation that can't be resolved. Putin does not seem like a
Khrushchev that he will back down.
Right.
He doesn't seem that way to me.
He doesn't seem that way.
So what? What do you do if you're NATO? I would just.
There's got to be some way to provide him a way to save face. And move out.
The eastern part of Ukraine may be carved up. I'm not sure.
So I'm not sure what it is, but there needs to be something.
Well, I hope if the next time we chat, we'll have good news.
It'd be great to do another one of these talks in a while after things have changed.
Sure.
And see.
Thank you.
Any last thoughts?
This whole trip of going to Krakow, I was just like everyone else. I was at home, very happy. Some of us were very at peace with COVID, being at home for weeks at a time.
Right.
And I've been at home for several years now because I was at home about a year before COVID.
Right.
And leaving for several weeks to Krakow was really a big undertaking for me and for Owl Farm, for the staff, for everything. And leaving Hunter's, our projects and the historic designation, and all of my family and my neighbors, everybody just came together, and I'm so I love Woody Creek and this Aspen Valley so much.
That's great.
Coming home. I've always loved my home and this country in general. I was married to an American writer, and I'm very proud. But this brought it home on a level that I'm really full of gratitude.
It's a great point to end on. Anita Thompson, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for hearing my story.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to get to meet you.